Good afternoon, and welcome to Comet Corner. This is a virtual series created by the UT Dallas Office of Research and Innovation in partnership with the schools across our campus to host chats with some of our notable alumni to hear how they have taken their experience out into the world and made an impact. My name is Danny Lamb, Coordinator of Program Development and Outreach in the Office of Research and Innovation here at UT Dallas. Please post questions in the chat for our speakers at any time. Moderating our discussion today is Dr. Sue Minkoff. Dr. Minkoff is a professor of mathematical sciences and affiliated professor in the departments of geosciences and science and mathematics education at the University of Texas at Dallas. She joined UTD in 2012. Her research interests include numerical modeling and analysis of earth science and photonics application problems. She received her Ph.D. in computational and applied mathematics from Rice University in 1995. From 1995 to 97, she was an NSF industrial postdoc at the University of Texas at Austin and British Petroleum. And from 1997 to 2000, she held the von Neumann Fellowship in the Mathematics Department at Sandia National Laboratories in Albuquerque, New Mexico. In 2000, she was promoted to senior member of the technical staff in the geophysics department at Sandia. From 2000 to 2012, she served on the faculty in the Department of Mathematics and Statistics at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Currently, Dr. Minkoff also serves as the Secretary of the Society for Industrial and Applied Mathematics. Dr. Minkoff, welcome to Comet Corner.
Thank you, Danny. Well, I'm excited to be here, and I want to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Allison Allie Kennedy Thurmond. She is a UT Dallas alum. In fact, she got all of her degrees at UT Dallas, including her Ph.D. in 2007 from the Department of Geosciences. Currently, she's responsible for managing Equinor's exploration assets in the U.S. Gulf of Mexico. Equinor used to be Statoil, for those of you who recognize that name more than Equinor. And during her 16-year career at Equinor, previously Statoil, she's held roles such as Vice President for Exploration in the Gulf of Mexico and Exploration Manager for Mexico, as well as leadership roles in research and development in both the U.S. and Norway. Prior to joining Equinor, she had a career working as a senior supervisory statistician for the U.S. Department of Commerce. As I said, she's a UT Dallas alum and got her Ph.D. in geosciences in 2007. So welcome, Allie. Please tell us about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Hi. Well, thanks for having me. This is really quite an honor to be able to come back and do this. Well, a little bit about my career trajectory. It was pretty atypical, I think. I began working at 17 for the U.S. government. I began a leadership journey at 22, and over those 10 years, I worked as a senior supervisory statistician for the Department of Commerce. At the same time, I was also working on my bachelor's and then my master's and then PhD at UTD. So during my PhD, I did take a fantastic opportunity to leave the government job so that I could be a teaching assistant at UTD. And it was an incredibly gratifying experience. It was the first time that I actually felt like a college student, even though I had a couple of degrees at UTD. While also in the throes of my PhD, my husband and a then 3-month-old son and I decided to take an opportunity and move to Bergen, Norway to work for a Norwegian oil company. It was then Hydro, and then became Statoil Hydro, then Statoil, and now Equinor. And that's a company that I still work for today. So while at Equinor, I have had roles from being a researcher. I then got to lead researchers, and then I led teams of researchers. And when I transferred to Houston, I was able to lead our regional geology team, head our Mexico assets, and then be over our exploration for both the US and Mexico. So now I am the asset manager for our exploration assets in the US Gulf of Mexico today.
So maybe you could say a little bit about what that means for people who don't work at an oil company. You know, what is an asset? Why the Gulf of Mexico is important, maybe a little bit, you know, for the non-initiated.
Sure. No, it's so, you know, exploration is something that we do in Equinor as part of an energy company exploring for oil and gas, and the U.S. Gulf of Mexico is an important area for us. in Equinor. Being an asset manager, what that means is I have it varies day to day, but a $500 million portfolio of assets, leases in the Gulf of Mexico. And when things work out really well, we get to drill $100 million wells. This takes bringing together more than 500, 600 people with very diverse competencies and from all over the world, who all come together just to safely and efficiently test for hydrocarbon potential or oil and gas in those leases. It's a really exciting role. I've been very humbled to have it. It requires a real strong safety mindset, because we absolutely want every single person to go home unharmed every day. It requires a reasonable economic risk tolerance, because exploration wells, they typically are unsuccessful more often than they're successful. So you have to have a strong stomach. It requires collaboration on a massive scale across many parts of the organizations, many companies, many disciplines. And I think more importantly, it requires an unwavering knowledge that you are not the smartest person at the table. So no one is. I mean, there are really just too many dimensions that interplay in these roles for any one person to have all the answers. So again, it's a really amazing role, and I'm quite humbled to be a part of the team.
So do you run into situations where someone has a strong opinion that maybe you don't agree with, and you have to think about ways to work with that person and to get them to, work with other people rather than sticking to their own ideas? And how do you do that, especially as a woman at the top?
I think the better question is, when don't I? I mean, again, when you're dealing with so many different disciplines and so many different personalities, nationalities, cultures, right? And absolutely, we want to be able to have a safe environment. We want people to be able to be proactive and bring up issues very early. And we all have our stop work authority. So any person in our company has the ability to stop work immediately for anyone and everyone if they feel that it is unsafe or could be unsafe for someone. So, you often run into that, but you want that, and we want to foster that, and we want to foster a culture of that.
Mm-hmm. So is this a role that you sort of saw yourself having at some point in the past, or is it somewhat surprising when you think about it now that you're in this role?
If you had asked me as a student at UTD what I would be doing when I was 50 years old, this is not the answer that I would give you. To be honest, I didn't know what I was going to do when I was working on my degrees in geoscience. But to be really honest, I didn't even plan to be a geoscientist. My plan going into college was to be a lawyer, because that was practical, and what family doesn't need a lawyer? And my heart, though, my real heart was in meteorology. As a kid, before school, for years, I would wake up an hour before school, before I needed to, just so that I could watch the Weather Channel. I was just really absolutely obsessed with the weather. And I didn't pursue science. I didn't think I was capable. And the reason for that is, I took a physics class in high school. I had transferred to a new school. I was middle of the semester. I walked in this class and noticed I was going to be the only girl in the class. I looked at my professor, or the physics teacher, and he looked at me and he says, "Are you sure you're in the right class?" And I handed him my schedule, and he confirmed it, and he pointed to two guys sitting at a table, and he says, "They're going to be your lab partners, and they're going to make sure you don't hurt anyone." So when I was in community college, taking, as we do, as many cheap courses as I could, I was sitting in my pre-law classes, because I thought I'd be a lawyer. And I was also taking my required science course, not physics, biology. And this biology class at Eastfield, it was taught by this older, tiny woman who was this absolute ball of fire. And I found that I was falling asleep in all of my pre-law classes, and I was absolutely riveted by this 5-foot fury of a professor in biology. And she didn't convert me to biology. That would have been a pretty hard stretch, but she really made me excited. She made me excited about science, and she made me excited about my capabilities in science, which I never really thought I had. She engaged with me. She got to know me. And when I look in hindsight, she was actually one of my earliest mentors. In talking to me, she was able to pull out in me that I had this passion in meteorology. And there were no schools within the commuting distance that offered meteorology, so because I needed to be local. So she encouraged me towards geology. And I took away a few lessons that I kind of continue to use in my role in my mentorships now. That, we always say words matter, but really what matters is how we respond to them. I let the perceptions of a physics teacher define me and gave me permission to limit my own ambitions. And if it weren't for the example set and time given to me by this spunky biology professor, I don't think I'd be in where I am today, or certainly in the role that I'm in today. So I'm really very appreciative that I had that particular intersection, that she listened, and that I took her advice. In retrospect, she had this transformational influence on my life and how it progressed. And the funny thing is I don't even remember her name. And this is something that I hope to get across in these types of engagements, that, people will forget whatever big accomplishments you were part of. They're going to forget whatever fancy titles that you may have had. They may even forget your name, but they won't forget the way you made them feel. So it's been very important to me to be quite selective and very intentional in how I let people influence my ambitions. But it's even become more important that I'm very intentional on how I influence other people.
Yeah, I mean, I read that background for you, and I was thinking that we were sort of opposites in some ways. So you had but the key is you had a passion for something. You had a passion for, the weather. Mm-hmm. And somebody, jumped on that and got you steered on a course. In some ways, we were very different in that I always wanted to be a mathematician. So when I was 5 years old, I had an older sister who we'd sit on the beach on Cape Cod, and she would give me math problems. And so when I went into school, I could carry, and nobody else knew how to carry. And I was like, ahead of the game. And I was always ahead of the game in math, and I found it really fun. So I sort of went into something that I just always loved. And I sort of had a little bit of a shaky path in the sense that when I got to college, by the end of college, I was taking very hard math courses, and I was sort of thinking, oh, I don't know, maybe I'll go to medical school. But then when I worked after college to, make some money for a while and try to make a final decision, I really missed math. But I sort of knew what I wanted to do from the time I was 5 years old. And I went to a university Duke, which had a big medical school, and everybody was pre-med. And I remember freshman year standing in the add drop line because they put me in freshman chemistry, and I didn't want freshman chemistry. I wanted to take math classes, So, I was reading your background where you thought about being a lawyer and you weren't quite sure, and then you became a geologist. I was sort of like very much on this path because it was something I loved. And actually we're more similar than different in the sense that you had this passion too. It's just you didn't know what to do with it. Math was something you could know was out there. But for many years, especially in college, everybody would say to me, what are you going to do with a math degree? Are you going to teach? And what they meant by that was, be an elementary school teacher or be a high school teacher. They didn't mean a professor. But, in thinking about your example of the biology professor that got you excited, I think for me, one of the things that I've thought about a lot is it's the people who have mentored me who haven't treated me differently that have had a big impact. They've treated me very supportively, but they sort of treat everybody supportively. And it's those people that I think I have benefited so much from. In my case, it was a high school calculus teacher. I had a wonderful high school calculus teacher who was doing active learning. He'd have us go out on the street and time him when he drove his car by and figure out the rate of change of his, car speed. And we'd sit there with stopwatches on the street, and he took us to all over the state to math contests. And, he treated me like everybody else. And that was so nice in retrospect. At the time, I didn't think about it, but there were guys on the high school math team who weren't treating me like everybody else, but the teacher was. And, that was 1980. It was a long time ago. And I think it's those people who really want you to succeed, and they do it in a way by giving you the same support they give everybody else. They don't say what your physics teacher said. They recognize you as a person, and a person with, you know, some talent and ambition, and they treat you with the same support they treat everybody else. And that's sort of, you know, maybe it's not really true. Maybe he was actually being more supportive. But to me, it was like I was just one of the math team, and he was just as nice to me as to everybody else. And I think, you know, when I think back on people, I really appreciate those people who actually didn't treat me negatively, but it wasn't overtly, you know, some extra special treatment. It was just, let's treat her like everybody else. She's good at this. Let's support her, you know. So anyway, I thought about a lot of that when I read some of your notes about your biology professor.
No, and if I mean, I think you make a really, really important point here in the kind of the difference between being led by a role model versus allyship,
Yeah.
right? And I think, you know, in my experience, you know, while I had a passion for a science field, I didn't see a role model for myself, and I let that limit me. People like you, you know, you know, I have a sister this way. I mean, as soon as she could walk, she knew she wanted to be a doctor, right? And nothing was going to stand in her way. And I think that's great. Those people, those women will find us in the STEM field. You know, it is, you know, so I think for those people, it's the allyship to move the hurdles out of the way that's needed. I think for some people, though, they need more than that. They need the role model. They need to be able to see themselves in these fields and in these roles to give them that extra push that they need. And they have the passion, they have it in them. You know, they need that role model. So I think it is a balance, and different people are going to need different things, whether it's they need a role model driving them or whether they need an ally.
That's right. I completely agree. And I think that's, you know, it leads into the next question, which is, you know, personal experiences as women leaders in STEM fields. I think especially, you know, at the top of a company or also at universities, it's really nice for, I mean, I've pushed and complained and shouted about hiring faculty, women and minorities. And I think it's because exactly what you say, there are a lot of people who want to see someone who looks like them, to see that it can be done. And, you know, I just went to a women in math workshop. It was supposed to be in Canada, but it was remote. And there were a lot of folks on there talking about people who were role models for them who happened to be at this meeting because they saw these women have a great career and have a family. And they thought, wow. And these women were older. You know, the younger people were talking about these older women. And so, you know, I always think about that when I hear about, oh, you can have both a career and a family, because I think you can. And that's something else that people can sort of model. Yeah.
No, I agree very much. And, you know, I think, you know, while I was not necessarily as intentional in my choice to go into STEM, I was incredibly intentional in my choice to lead. It's something that I actually decided before I was able to drink. I knew I wanted to lead, and I wanted to lead scientists. You know, and because I worked during the day in a job and I went to school at night, I really quickly found that, you know, the quality of your leader can actually affect the quality of all aspects of your life, not just your working hours. So when I had a really strong, supportive leader that I kind of could sync with, right? I did a good job at work, of course, but I also had energy. When I got home, I would, you know, go to class with more energy. I'd get my homework done. My grades were better. I was a nicer person. My family didn't mind being around me. And I found one time I had leaders who weren't as supportive, or I didn't sync with well. And my job, I didn't enjoy it very much, but I also didn't have energy when I went home. I didn't necessarily do a great job of my homework. I wasn't nice to be around. I wasn't a happy person. And it occurred to me, wow, unless you are incredibly good at compartmentalizing, that one individual can have this huge impact in the quality of your life, at least for that period of time. And so I decided that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted a job that gave me the chance to positively impact in a way, to be able to not only impact a company's bottom line, but to actually have that ripple effect across, you know, everyone that worked into a team. So I was quite intentional that I wanted to go into a leader role. I didn't think it would happen so early. When I was encouraged by a senior leader, you know, in the government to apply for a leadership role. I was 22 and I didn't hesitate. I did it immediately. I was surprised I had the opportunity so early. And I'll be forever grateful I remember his name, Mike Garner. I'll be forever grateful, that he saw something in me that I didn't see. He saw that I was ready. And so while I studied at night to be a scientist, I actually got to work during the day to learn how to be an effective leader. So, I think it's important that we analyze those aspects of ourselves early on. Ask yourself, at what level do you want to be able to influence? If it is truly technical and you want technical leadership, then absolutely master that, nail it, work at it. But if you also feel that you want to be able to influence and shape the course of other people's careers, or to influence and shape, decisions that happen, then you can actively work on that while you're studying your technical skills.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the single most satisfying part of my job is that I look at some of my students and what they're doing now. Is, you teach students in class, but you also advise them. And advising students, on a PhD or a master's degree that goes on for years, you really have an influence on their career trajectory. That's incredibly satisfying. You look at them and you're like, wow, she's got tenure, she's got a career award from the National Science Foundation, or she's leading this team at ExxonMobil, or, whatever they're doing. I mean, not all students stay in touch, but the ones that do, that's really satisfying, that they want to keep thanking you, for your efforts to help them. And to me, that's my biggest accomplishment, is the students I've had who have gone on and done things themselves, and especially the women. They're out there blazing trails, and they are affecting other people. So it becomes this sort of, branches of a tree sort of thing. But going back to what you said about the impact of leaders, it's so true. And, we're not perfect. All of us make our own mistakes sometimes as leaders. We don't always, have the patience we need or whatever. But I was thinking about what you said, because I was thinking about that this morning, that when you're in sync with your leader, it's so much more satisfying. It's so much more enjoyable, because you're able to get things done. When you're not in sync, you don't get anything done, because people, and often it's because somebody's scared for things to change. They don't want, the way things have always been to suddenly be different. And, I think you and I are probably examples of people who want things always to improve. And that means you're shaking things up. You're not happy with the status quo, and that means some people don't like that. And, it's most exciting when you can be with someone, work with someone who actually wants things to improve. And, anyway, yeah, being in sync is important. So along those lines, are there things that you've dealt with along the way? I mean, it couldn't have all been this meteorize towards where you are now. There must be some things that were challenges that, at the time you did something and it didn't seem to work right. I mean, maybe you had some big well that failed or something, but maybe it was something more personal in your own career. And how did you deal with that? And how do you think about that now in hindsight, those challenges or failures?
Yeah, no, it's something that I think about a lot, and I've struggled a bit. I often struggle a bit when talking about failure in general, because it feels very defeatist, right? I mean, I've had to really reshape my relationship with the word failure, right? So failure is defined as a lack of success. So then it begs the question, how do you define success? Well, Webster defines it as an accomplishment of an aim or a purpose. Well, I get to define my aim. I get to define my purpose, right? So do you really ever fail, right? So I've had to learn to reshape my relationship with the word failure. So I don't fear failure, right? I see it as an opportunity to pivot, or to learn, or to do both. I mean, if you don't pivot or learn from an endeavor, then you can say you failed, right? I mean, if you look at it in one way, I failed to become a lawyer. I didn't achieve that aim or purpose. Well, did I fail? I chose to pivot to geosciences. And so I think, when we reshape our relationship with the word failure, it gives us a chance to be a little bit more bold and energetic towards our endeavors. I mean, I have had research projects. I had one in particular where we spent, multiple tens of millions of dollars, and it went on way too long, and it didn't work. And it would have certainly been seen as a failure if you looked at the original purpose of the project, but we were actually able to learn from that and then drive the technology development into a direction that was a much more impactful direction. So I still don't see it as a failure, something we were able to learn and pivot from. When I took jiu-jitsu, there was a quote on the dojo wall that I loved, and it says, you win or learn. There is no losing. And so that's always been, that helped me reshape, the way I think about failure. So, I think we need a better mindset. We need to improve our relationship with the word failure. And that's really tough because in primary and secondary school, nobody wants to fail a class. You don't want to lose a competitive sporting event. Failure and losing is something that we actually avoid. So, but I really think if we're going to drive any kind of advancement, be it our personal advancement, a technological advancement, a societal advancement, if we don't risk failure, we just creep. We don't actually advance.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you've got to, I think one thing that is so important is that, people have to realize, especially women, that they may sort of fail. I'm going to use that word. You're much more optimistic than me. But as you said, maybe it will teach them something about what they really, could succeed at, or who they are. I do think back on things and think, oh, at the time I thought this was so sad that I didn't get this, whatever. And there was, one example in particular. I wanted to bring this conference for minority women interested in math and statistics to my former institution, UMBC, and I wrote a proposal. I had been to the one at NC State, and I really liked it. I wrote a proposal, and we didn't get it. It went somewhere else. But then a year or two later, it was like every 2 years they had this conference, they contacted me, and they said, we liked your proposal. Do you want to hold the next one? And to me, that was a great example of how oftentimes you do something, you put a huge amount of effort in. I mean, that's one thing I'm sure you encounter at what you do, but also in academia, where we do research projects that take years. It takes years to get a PhD student to graduate. We write many grants. They're very involved. They often get rejected. We have to resubmit them. Nothing is a short-term project. Everything seems to take, other than grading a midterm or something, everything takes a really long time. And that means that you feel worse when the paper's rejected or whatever. But oftentimes, I think what happens is that you're out there, you've taken this risk, and somebody sees that, and they come back to you later, and they recognize that you wanted to do something, or I think often these failures, as I have viewed them, end up being successes. It just may take time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it really depends on where you anchor that passion. So if you anchor that passion on that paper or on that grant or on that student, then that, if it doesn't work the way you want it to, that is going to feel more personal and you're going to feel it more. But if you anchor your passion a bit higher, a bit further out, what you're trying to achieve with your legacy, with your time on this planet, right? Then the rest of these things become, it's like, if I have set a goal to make it to the office and I'm going to go this direction, but now there's an accident, I don't just give up, right? So they just become obstacles to overcome to ultimately reach what you're trying to achieve. So I think it is important that we really understand where we're anchoring that passion at, and not to set that at the granular level. Mm-hmm. Set it at more the aspirational level, and then it allows you to absorb when things don't work out the way you thought they would, and to be able to learn and pivot from it. You're not devastated or derailed by it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I can see that in your personality, which is probably one of the things that makes you such a good leader. I recently read a quote from the president at UMBC who's going to retire, and he said something, I'm paraphrasing, but something like, success is a journey, not a destination. And I think as we get older and we look back on the things that we've done, we kind of forget the things that didn't work out. And we see more the things that did work out and that were successes. So in terms of diversity and inclusion, do you think that those ideas have evolved since you've been, in the workforce, and how have they evolved? And are you happy with the directions things are moving in, or do you want things to change more? What are your thoughts on diversity and inclusion right now?
Yeah, I mean, they are evolving. I mean, I think we have to say they are evolving. I think if you had asked me that question maybe last month, I'd have a little different. I have a tendency during times like this, it was International Women's Day, yesterday, and Women's Month this month, and those are times when I find myself getting frustrated. Why are we still having these conversations, right? I do believe they're evolving, and I was very fortunate in the way that I came into both science and leadership, that I was able to be in very inclusive environments. I was encouraged to take on a leader role. I had colleagues around me who were my leaders, but now they're colleagues. I mean, I was cocooned in support. I was surrounded by people. They pushed me hard, but they were never going to let me catastrophically fail. And I didn't have to look over my shoulder. No one was gunning for me. I was able to just be my authentic self with all my flaws and my eagerness to improve, although I'm sure that was incredibly frustrating for them with my eagerness. And so I was able to experiment with my leadership and to develop a style that was very natural for me. I didn't have to conform to somebody else's view of what a leader should be. And the same thing in the technical world, in UTD and the geosciences. We had all male faculty. There was a few female students, right? I never felt advantaged or disadvantaged because I was a woman. And I know that's not everyone's experience. I know how fortunate I was to have that particular experience. The professors that I worked with, whether it be because they had daughters of their own, or they had strong, women, either, as partners, or, as mothers, or maybe all of those things, right? But they were allies. And I was very, very fortunate to have that. And like I said, I know that's not everyone's experience, but it did really show me how important being in an inclusive environment can really positively shape you as both a scientist and as a leader. So when I went into the professional world and started leading technical teams, that's where I wanted to be, a role model when it was appropriate and an ally always. And so, I think that's been an individual journey for me, so I didn't have to struggle through that as much. I've later been in less inclusive environments. And I think we also have to think about what we define as inclusivity for a woman or certain ethnicities. In Norway, my experience was a little bit different. They'd moved a little further along in the gender discussion in Norway earlier. I mean, it's still challenges, of course, but it was a little different. So I didn't really feel issues around that. Where I really experienced more issues or saw where the environment needed improving was in the diversity of approach. Because when you're working in research and you're working with scientists, you end up often having to manage a blended team of neurotypical and neurodiverse individuals. And I'm very neurotypical, right? I mean, you give me a task and a Gantt chart forms in front of my eyes, body language, eye contact, that's like a second language for me. But there are other people who that's not where their strength is, but they have abilities and gifts, the creativity, the imagination, the ability to hold large amounts of information, to be able to process, signal from the noise, right? But they're not going to get to a meeting on time. They're not going to be able to focus in the same way. They're not going to be able to conform to some of the social norms, right? So how do you create environments that are truly inclusive, where, everyone can play to their strengths and no one is really forced to conform to an idea of how work should be done? So I think that's one of the places that I think we still have a lot of evolution to do and a leap in inclusivity. It's not going to be one-dimensional. It's not just about gender balance. It's not just about racial equality. It's not just about racial neurodiversity. It's all of these things in concert. It's about creating those environments where each person can play to their strengths as their authentic selves.
Yeah.
And then as a leader, you take the product of that to drive progress. It sounds aspirational, and we see it as a challenge, but it actually can be quite magical when you get it to work.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, there's a similar discussion in education about people learning in different ways and, you know, trying to teach people who have naturally different ways that they learn things. Maybe they're learning things more easily if they're visual. You know, maybe they're learning things more easily if it's in a situation where they get to problem solve in groups. But it's very hard. How do you incorporate all that in a classroom? Yeah. So I think it's great if you're able to do that, you know, and be inclusive.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the bigger thing is understanding that it's a challenge,
Yeah.
and then looking for those ways that you can. I mean, there's not necessarily a rule book that says this is what you have to look at the team in itself. And every time you bring a new member of the team, then the ecosystem has to adapt to that new member of the team. So it really is about needing to have, you know, both leadership and, you know, teams that really strive for that inclusivity. They, you know, not just because it's the right thing to do, but it also brings a lot of value to what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, I mean, one of the things I really took out of my former institution, which had the scholarship program, the Meyerhoff Scholars, for minority students who were interested in grad school, was high expectations. Mm-hmm. And I think that is something, however people learn, however they can contribute, you as a leader have to have high expectations for everybody. Mm-hmm. And some people don't want that laid on them. They don't want to be expected to do things at a very high level, but ultimately that's how they succeed. You know, I think one of the biggest challenges I find working with students in research in math is teaching them how to communicate. How do you write a paper? How do you give a talk? And often we have students who think, well, I'm good at math. Why do I need to write well? And I'm sure this is something you've encountered in the workplace, but if you can't communicate, you can't succeed at barely anything. You've got to be able to present yourself well giving a talk, and you've got to be able to write well, you know, and that's something I put enormous amounts of effort into. And it's not always appreciated until much later. I have students come back who are faculty or they're working somewhere as in a leadership position. They're like, wow, I really appreciate all the effort you put into my writing. And they hate me when I'm their advisor because I don't let anything go by, and I have very high expectations. But, you know, all of these things are important. And I think one of the ways that I try to support people, which may not come across like supportive, you know, a supportive environment, but is to have a high expectations and to teach these basic skills that maybe don't seem obvious if someone applies to a PhD program in math, but that you absolutely need to succeed. And it's my goal that the people working with me have achieved things at a level that they're going to succeed when they go out in the world. And they may not appreciate it when I'm making them redo some paper for the 20th time. But, you know, that was sort of the role models I had. My advisor, you know, I was always good at writing. I wanted to be a math major, but I also wanted to double major in math and English because I happened to love reading books and I was always good at writing. And even with my confidence in my ability to write, my advisor in grad school spent a lot of time teaching me how to write a math paper. And I put that time and effort in because I don't see how you can succeed in anything, business, industry, government, academia, if you can't communicate. So I've sort of gotten off topic here a bit, but it's just.
But if I can, I mean, I think you make a really good point, and you bring it full circle back to you can set those high expectations. They go beyond maybe what the students' expectations were, but you also have to create an environment where they don't fear failure, right? Yeah. So it kind of comes full circle. You know, you can push them really hard, but give them that comfort that you're not gonna succeed, or you're not gonna do it right necessarily the first time. That's okay. This is how we learn and pivot.
Yeah. So I think it is important that women are in decision-making roles. What advice do you have for young women to push to be in and stay in decision-making roles like you've been able to be in?
You know, this is something that I have, I've always had this, passion around diversity, equity, inclusion, but I've been looking into this particular area a little bit more because you talk about how we've improved and such, and there have been changes in the ratio of genders at various business tables. I mean, that has been an improvement. We're still far from perfect, and it does vary by country to country, industry to industry, company to company. You're going to have that variation, but to a large degree, people do recognize the data supports that you create greater value when you have diverse minds on the topic. So that's become pretty well ingrained. It's how do we execute on it? But I think where most countries, industries, companies really have improvement is how the diversity is deployed. For example, you can see a table or boardroom in a conference room, and you can see diverse genders, diverse ethnicities at that table. But there's some people at that table who are supporting decisions. And there are some people at the table who own the decisions. And I theorize that more often than not, you're going to see a higher level of diversity in supporting roles than you're going to see when you look at those around the table who own the decisions. And I also theorize that more oftentimes for a woman or a person from a marginalized community, for them to have gotten a seat at that table, they needed to conform. They needed to adjust their approach. A woman will often have to behave more like a man, be more assertive, be more vocal, pound the table to even get a seat at the table. And that's not if they haven't gone too far and they're perceived as bossy, right? But the challenge is when we conform to get a seat at the table, we risk losing the value our diversity brings to the table, leaving it at the door. So I think we do have a long way to go to ensure that we're actually deploying that diversity, not just in supporting roles, but throughout the decision-making funnel. But then we also have a long way to go to make sure that it is truly diverse. It's just not people who look different around the table, but there are people who are able to bring with them their approach and their experiences through the door when they sit at the table.
That's right. I agree. And I mean, as a woman who's always been somewhat outspoken, I've seen, how that affects me. It offends some people. It's good with other people. It really gets back to the idea of people who are on, your ally, who are thinking the way you are and who don't just want things to stay the way they've always been. So I think there is a balance, especially for women. There's, many studies that if you're the woman pounding the table, you're viewed very negatively. If you're a man pounding the table, you may be able to get away with it. It might look like you're a strong leader. For women, it looks usually aggressive. But I think it's really important for women to realize that these jobs, these leadership roles or jobs in STEM or in academia or in government or business, they're satisfying. And we have one life. We have to think about not everybody wants to be a mathematician or a geophysicist or a geoscientist or a biologist or a physicist. That's fine. There's no reason they have to be. But I think it's so important when I hear women say, well, I don't love my job, but I'm going to stay in it because I'm making good money or it's good with my family. And I feel sad when I hear that. Not everybody's going to find a job they love, and that's women and men. But one thing women have to realize is that for those of us who have chosen to be in these fields, we've chosen it because it is satisfying. We're getting to have an impact. We're doing something we probably love. And they could too, and they should realize that maybe it's worth the struggle. There will be struggle. I mean, you were very lucky if most of your environments were inclusive. Mine were not. Some of them were very inclusive. My high school calculus teacher, my advisor was amazing. I still talk to him. I still keep up with him. One of the best mentors anybody could have. And then I found mentors somewhat randomly. You'll end up doing something like, I gave a talk at Columbia and I was in a cab and I told the head of the math department that I wanted to do some professional service. And he happened to be the vice president of the big applied math professional organization, he put me on a committee. Now I'm secretary of that organization, you know. And he ended up being a great mentor, and he was somebody I didn't have any reason to interact with, but he ended up being someone I could email all the time and get advice from, and he was so nice about it, you know. So the point is that you have to find your mentors and your allies, and it won't always be easy. But I think for many women, they might not realize that these kinds of leadership roles or STEM jobs, they can be incredibly satisfying. They can be a chance for you to actually have a life with impact, and that is worth it.
Yeah. So one thing I'll follow up with that is I think you're absolutely right. I think, and while I have been fortunate to be in a number of inclusive environments, I certainly have experienced in a lack of equity. I mean, there have been many years where I've sat next to a male colleague who's had the similar or same position I have, with even potentially less responsibility, and they're titled higher than I am. I mean, that's, you know, that's even in the best intended organizations and companies, these things kind of naturally kind of happen. And oftentimes it's because, you know, maybe women, we're not the ones pounding the table and demanding things that maybe the men are. So I think it's not necessarily always specifically along gender lines. It is something to do with the personality lines. And how you combat that, or a good way to make sure you're sense checking yourself, is exactly what you're talking about. It's about having good mentors and allies. I would actually encourage women, you know, in any field, but especially in the STEM field, you don't need a mentor. You need a board of directors. You need your own personal board of directors, and they need to be as diverse as you can make them. Now, you don't need to hold formal board meetings and call to order and have voting rules, right? They don't even need to know who the other board members are. But you need to have a collection of people, and you need to rotate them, because, you know, I could be a great, you know, board member for somebody in a certain phase of their life, and they outgrow me, right? So constantly be reshaping your board so that you have people that when you come to a challenge, or you see some, you know, inequity, or you're curious about a role, if you should take it or not, or the work-life balance, there are many people that you can get that advice from and be able to bounce those ideas off, rather than, I always feel sorry when I'm somebody's only mentor. They're only getting my perspective, and it's colored by my own perceptions and experiences. And I really think people need to be able to get a range of perspectives and experiences.
Yeah, I agree. And I really liked what you said about rotating the board, because this same person that I mentioned that put me on some SIAM service work, we're not really in touch much anymore, but for many years we emailed a lot, and he was just doing it because he's a good guy. He got nothing out of it that I could see, but, you know, I mean, we just became friends. And a lot of times mentors at certain stages of your life later become friends, but maybe you're not in touch with all of them all forever, you know, and that's fine too. But it's good to find these people, and it can be completely random chance sometimes, and you know, appreciate them while you have them. I think we're at the point where we're going to go to some questions. I see one in the chat. It says, and this is for you, Allie, would you be able to tell us more about Equinor, such as what is the most dissatisfying part of your job, and you know, what is the chain of command?
It sounds like somebody's been sitting in some of my meetings this morning. So, okay, a little bit about Equinor. I mean, we are a broad energy company. You know, historically, oil and gas, you know, for a long time, basin master on the NCS, a really proud tradition of, you know, many decades on the NCS, Norwegian Continental Shelf. But we are now an international oil company. So a national oil company that, you know, put on the big boy pants, and an international oil company now transforming into a broad energy company. And it was the rationale for the name change. You know, when your name was Statoil, which is state oil, you know, it's hard to sell yourself and, you know, convince people that you're a broad energy company. So, you know, Equinor was the name that was chosen. Equi for, you know, equality, you know, so I'm quite proud of that. And then Nor for the Norwegian heritage that we bring. And so you pull these two things together. And one of the things that I have to always remind myself of is that, you know, Equinor, we are a company that has very high ambitions. That doesn't mean we're there yet. You know, these are places we're still going, both in terms of becoming a broad energy company, but also becoming a more inclusive and equitable company. It's certainly well within the ambitions and within the ability of our company to do, and that's the direction we want to go. And as employees, we need to hold that accountable. So, I'm quite proud that they, put that in the name and they want to stand behind that. And then, on the sustainability and the energy direction with the energy transition, this is something the company is, in the forefront of. And they want to drive the energy transition. And I can remember when I was doing research, we had people who were doing research on floating windmills, right? And it seemed like a crazy idea. And now offshore wind is a place that, many countries are, bidding acreage and projects are being sanctioned. And so it's a really exciting place to be. So, quite proud to look at Equinor's heritage in that. In terms of, challenges, and I forget how it was worded,
what is the most dissatisfying of your job?
I think it's not. I don't find it dissatisfying. It's probably inefficient, which can give you some dissatisfaction. Is I'm based in Houston. I spent 9 years in Norway. I know the culture, I know the people, and that's amazing. But you're still kind of you need to work with the mothership. Right, there's still a lot. There are other companies that they'll spin off, or there's more autonomy in the different locations, and this a lot is driven from our headquarters in Norway. That brings us a lot of value, and there's a lot of competence there. There's mass there, but it can slow things down to a certain degree. So when you want to make decisions like that, and you need to be competitive in an environment like the U.S. GOM, that maybe can be a bit frustrating. And then on the organizational structure, it's a great question, because we actually just changed that less than a year ago, and we made a huge, really turned around the way we work. So we now have competence centers where our technical people all belong to certain competence centers so that they can grow and develop in those centers, and then they're deployed to task. And this is a really different. So, I went to bed one day having about 45, 50 people reporting in my line, and I woke up the next day and I was a party of one, because all the people that used to report to me now report in a competence center. And so there are benefits, real benefits to that, but it's a growing process, and it's so it'll be some time before we really get our feet, but it has a lot of potential. So those are probably some of the bigger challenges, at least from my little corner of the world.
So another question is, seeking mentors or quote a board of directors requires introspection and vulnerability. How were you able to gain those skills to be able to find allies?
It's a really great question. And I think you have to have these honest conversations with yourself. What are you trying to get out of this? If you're not willing to be vulnerable, if you're not willing to be really honest and open, then what's the point? If you're going to paint a picture, that doesn't exist, and then go to a potential ally or a mentor and say, okay, this is all rosy and this is how it is. What's your advice for me? They're going to be like, keep doing what you're doing. Well, that doesn't get you anywhere.
Right.
So, if you're honest with yourself and you want genuine advice, then you have to be able to shed those pre-existing roles that we put on ourselves and show your vulnerabilities. But that takes trust. And so then you need to make sure you select these mentors and these people on your board that you genuinely trust. So, you're not going to necessarily want to pick a person who's going to be competing for you in that role that you're going to be, or, so finding people outside your industry is fantastic, right? Finding people that, are in different parts of the world, so you wouldn't necessarily be competing, right? And so you really have to build up that level of trust.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, I've often been to conferences where there'll be some event for women and minorities to try to pair people up with more senior mathematicians and make them your mentor. And I always find it a little artificial, because it really isn't that simple. A mentor is something that seems to almost either it's somebody who, you know, was your advisor or something and you chose that person for a reason, or it's somewhat, you know, serendipitous and it just happens, you know. I think that we're lucky if we meet people who I have always picked mentors who are people I really admire. And they're people who, you know, I've often read, you want to work with the smartest people you can find, not the smartest person in the room, but just somebody who you're going to learn from. And the mentors I've found are people I really admire and that I want to be like. And, you know, I think we seek those people out and often they're willing to be mentors. And there's no like, can you sign this sheet of paper as a contract that you're going to be my mentor and I'll be your mentee? There's nothing like that. It just happens somewhat organically. But again, it's something that when you look back and you say, wow, this person's somebody I have so much respect for. They're so good at all these things and they're really nice and they were really willing to spend time talking to me, you know, and you really appreciate that. But I think it can be hard. I mean, it's not something that you can just go and say, will you be my mentor? And it necessarily works that way. It's more chance encounters and putting yourself out there, getting a network, going to conferences, you know, finding a way to interact with as many people as you can so that you can sort of naturally build a network. And some of those people will maybe be your competitors, but many of them will be senior and they'll end up wanting to help you. And, you know, to me, that's the way you get mentors. You network and you meet as many people as possible. And some of them end up being very supportive and great to have in your life.
So yeah, so I just have one question that's my personal question that I'd really just like to give out. What advice would you give to both men and women trying to make a positive impact in those leadership and allyship roles? And some tangible advice to where men and women both in those leadership roles can help bring women up.
So yeah, this is a fantastic question because, you know, I think we have a lot of, you know, challenges in front of us in terms of, you know, diversity, equity, inclusion that feel very systematic, but it doesn't necessarily feel like we can solve those problems. So I think coming at this from a solution-oriented approach I really like. I talked about one for women with the board of directors. So I think that's quite important. I think for those that are in a leadership type of role, whether you're a man or a woman, whether you're leading professionally or technically, I think you need to throw out the rule book. Obviously, you know, we've been working on this for a long time and we're not making the kind of progress we need to make at the pace we want to make it. So I think we have to start to throw out the rule book in terms of how do we foster, you know, women and people in marginalized communities to move up technically and professionally in their roles. And there's a lot of different ways. And I think, you know, don't just be stuck with the tools that are in front of you because those are not the tools that are necessarily working. And then I think for everyone, you know, being an ally is important. Absolutely. Being an ally is great, but being a passive ally is not enough. You have to be an active ally. And an active ally is someone who seeks to bring access, inclusivity, and equity to your peers and to your organization, not because it benefits you personally, but because you recognize the value it brings to the whole. So I would encourage, and I actually challenge every single person, spend 10 minutes every Friday and think about in what ways this week was I an active ally? And when you come up with that number, challenge yourself. Can I increase it by 1 next week? And imagine if everybody does that, you know, how much change we could foster through active allyship. And then the first thing you might be doing is, well, how do I be an active ally? What does that look like? Well, every single person here, you only need one skill to be an active ally, the first skill you need, and that's to be able to read. There is so much literature. You don't have to go and have awkward conversations with you know, women or people in marginalized communities to understand, you know, their challenges and struggles. They put it out there. They've expressed that, right? If you looked at my LinkedIn profile, I posted yesterday a link to the 2021 Women in the Workplace report that came out from McKinsey, excuse me, and from Lean In. Fantastic report. So if you do one thing that you want to do this week and say that I did this and I was an active ally by doing this, go and read that report. Because what it does is help you understand the scope of the problem as it is today. It gives you people's experiences. It talks about what microaggression is, right? We can talk about, oh, you know, we need to limit microaggression. What is it? And it also gives a good examples of what active allyship looks like. So that's the first place. Go and read that report and then take some of that and see what you can do on a day-to-day.
Yeah, I'll just finish. I know we're out of time, and say I think for women, it's really important to do something you're passionate about. You got to do things that if you are going to, you know, encounter some challenges and struggles, you need to do something you love. And I think many of us get to this point, and we also love the idea of inclusivity and change. And I think, you know, there's a great expression that I used to hear from a woman who was big on supporting other women faculty, and she used to talk about speaking truth to power. And I think that's so important. There has to be people in the workplace who are telling the people in power about things that need to be fixed and improved. So, you know, hopefully if we're all doing that as much as we can without getting in trouble, things will improve eventually. So thank you, Allie. We're out of time. I'm going to let Annie wrap it up.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time, talent, and resources with us today, Dr. Thurmond and Dr. Minkoff. Truly, as a young female professional, I really did learn so much from this conversation today. Audience, thank you for joining us. To view a full list of Office of Research and Innovation events, please visit utd.link/research calendar. Please feel free to scan the QR code to follow us on social media, take the survey, or sign up for our newsletter. Thank you and have a nice afternoon, everyone.